Hi, welcome back to Gen Z Bible class, where today we're going to be looking at Genesis chapter 38. We've skipped a couple of chapters, and the reason is because Genesis chapter 38 is a story that's similar to the last one that we did in Genesis 34, the story about Dinah. And this involves another woman, another descendant, or in this case a granddaughter of Jacob, and her name is Tamar. And her story has a lot of similarities in a way to the story of Dinah that we talked about last week. But there's some more lessons I think that we can learn from her story in terms of the way God, kind of directs our paths and leads us in our life, and what he accomplishes sometimes through difficult circumstances. So let's get into the story, and we'll begin by reading the first couple of verses. It says that at that time, Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hira. And there Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. He married her and made love to her. And it goes on to say that she bore him 3 children, one named one named Onan, and one named Shelah. So here we have Judah. And one thing we notice about him, he's of course one of Jacob's 11 sons, is that he decided, and this was very similar to how the story of last week started out. Remember that Dinah decided she wanted to go out and explore a little bit and meet some of the local Canaanite women, probably lonely there. I don't know if she had any sisters or other people to relate to. So she wandered off. And now here, Judah is doing something very similar, only in a more dramatic way, because he's literally leaving the rest of the brothers and all of their families behind and heading out on his own. So he's going to, I guess, isolate himself a little bit from the rest of the family and find himself surrounded by these Canaanite people. And this is exactly where he finds his wife. I think it's interesting that she doesn't seem to have a name. She's always referred to as the daughter of Shua. I'm not sure if there's any significance in that or not. But anyway, she ends up, as we said, giving him 3 sons. And going on a little bit in verse 6, it says that Judah got a wife for his first son, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight. So the Lord put him to death. This is not a good start in your married life. So this is where Tamar comes into the picture, and she is found by Judah to be a wife of his first son, So they usually go in order, and it's always the first son gets married first, and just like it was with Leah, if you remember that whole story. So he is responsible now. Of course, they don't go out on dating sites and try to find a wife for themselves. It's always the parents that arrange these things, and this is exactly what Judah does for his son, Er. Now, unfortunately, I don't know the details, but Er was described as being a wicked man, and as a result, God kind of zaps him. He kills him. So things are not going well for Tamar at this point. The next thing that happens is, and this is, again, part of the culture and part of the way life was back then, is that the next brother, Onan, Er's younger brother, is now expected to take Tamar as his wife. Now, why is that? Well, this was part of the custom of the day. It was something called a levirate marriage. And it was something that became part of the Jewish culture and lifestyle. And the reason for it was, as we mentioned before, it was a really important thing. It was a bad thing for a woman to be single. And in those days, there was just nobody to take care of you. They didn't have all the social programs that we have going on today. And so for a woman to find herself as a widow, unmarried, and now in this case, this is where Tamar is, so it was customary to give this widowed woman, if she didn't have any children, to the next son so that she would be able to have children and have security in her old age. Well, Onan turns out to be a real stinker too, and he refuses to give her a son. He's more worried about, well, I'm just going to, if I have a son through her, he's going to get some of my stuff, and I don't want that to happen. So he ends up being an evil man. And guess what happens to him? The same thing that happened to her. The Lord struck him dead. So things are really not going very well for poor Tamar here. And what does she do now? Well, she goes to her father, and I guess you could say father-in-law, and he simply advises her, okay, just go home, live with your father as a widow. And then when my third son gets old enough, you can marry him. This doesn't really sound like such a good idea to me. I mean, this kid is young enough so he can't even get married yet. And now she's already been married, twice, a double widow. And he's promising her that when this kid gets old enough, you can marry him. Well, we're going to find out that doesn't exactly work out. But the next thing that happens, what happens next in this exciting story, in verse 12. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. When Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah to the men who were shearing sheep, and his friend Hira, the Adulamite, went with him. Hira strikes me as being maybe not the best quality friend to have. It seems to me like he's heading him off in some wrong directions here. We'll see a little bit more about that as time goes on here. But he's recovered. Now Judah has recovered from his grief and losing his wife, and they go to the sheep shearing. And this was important. It was a big thing because these were Judah's sheep, and this was a big part of your income. That happened, I believe, just once a year. You're waiting all year long for the sheep to grow their wool, and wool was a very important commodity at that time. So he's going to go to make sure everything is going well. And actually, it was kind of a big celebration. The sheep shearing was almost like a social gathering, something that happened once a year. So Tamar gets wind of what Judah is up to, and she comes up with a plan of her own to deal with her situation. We read it starting in verse 13. When Tamar was told, "Your father is on his way to Timnah to shear sheep," she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then sat down at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that though Shelah had grown up, she had not been given to him as his wife. I told you that wouldn't work out, and it didn't. I mean, I don't know how many years are going on now, and Shelah finally grows up, and she's, coming to the sad realization that this is not going to happen. This marriage to her and this third son is simply not going to happen. So now she has devised a plan. And she puts a veil over her face, and she disguises herself, and she kind of plants herself right in the road where she knows that Judah is going to be traveling on his way to Timnah. And she disguises herself as a prostitute. Now this was, going back to that time and that culture, and remember, this was a pagan culture, and they had these prostitutes that were kind of all mixed up in their culture and their religion, and they served a function within the culture. Whether they say that's the oldest profession in the world, unfortunately. But she's kind of conniving to achieve something. She has a goal in mind here. And we continue to read in verse 15. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, "Come now, let me sleep with you." This is not a good thing. Judah now Of course, his wife had passed away. I'm sure maybe he's lonely, and he's with his friend. This guy Hela, I don't think he was the most upstanding person or the best example for Judah to be hanging out with. I don't know if he had any part in sending Judah in this direction, but nevertheless, and all of these people in the Bible are just people, and they still have this sinful human nature. So we see him actually cooperating with Tamar's plan, and it's not going to work out so well for Judah, but it's working out okay for Tamar, because this is exactly what she wanted to happen. Now, before this all happens, though, she has to make an agreement with him, and he promises to give her a young goat from his herd. You don't work for free under these circumstances, but she pushes him a little bit farther, because he doesn't, you don't go around with a goat in your wallet. This was something he would have to send to her later. So she asks him, well, what can you give me as security? As a down payment, so that I know a pledge, so I know I'm going to get this sheep. And this is in verse 18. And he said, what pledge should I give you? Your seal and its cord and the staff in your hand. So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. If you understand, again, the time and the culture, how important this staff, it talks about three things: a staff, a cord, and a seal. And the staff would have been, that would have been a way that people would have recognized you. It was kind of an identification, similar to an identification implement, I guess. And the seal was something that was even more important, because if you put your seal on something, it was, it's kind of like using a credit card. I guess in a way, you would say that what he gave her would be similar to like giving her his wallet. And probably not the wisest thing, but again, we were talking about people who did things in impetuous ways the last time, and I think maybe this is coming under the same category, that this is something that Judah kind of gets into trouble by getting mixed up with. Well, what happens next? I'll just kind of give a rundown and basically on what happens. After this whole thing is over, she goes back home and gets back into her regular routine. She's no longer disguised, and Judah sends his buddy, his not so upright buddy, to go back and to pay this prostitute the goat that he owes her. And unfortunately, when he goes to find her, he goes back to that same place. Evidently, these prostitutes would have worked in a certain spot, and you would always be able to find them there, and she wasn't there. Now, this is getting serious. It's getting very embarrassing for Judah, because he gave her this really important stuff, and now they can't find her. And, he's embarrassed because he can't. Okay, Judah, let's make this deal. Give me your seal so that I know you approve this, and he doesn't have it. And how is he going to explain this? Hey, by the way, what did you do with your staff? He can't tell people what happened, because it's just so embarrassing. This goes on for I don't know how long. Well, I do know how long. It goes on for about 3 months. And in verse 24, we read the next thing that happens. About 3 months later, Judah was told, your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant. Judah said, bring her out and have her burned to death. Oh, man, I'm glad. It's not a nice thing to be a woman back in those days. She didn't do anything wrong. She is really just trying to survive, and now she's being sentenced to death. Because they know she's pregnant, and they don't know how that happened. They're assuming that she just had some illicit affair with some guy out of desperation, and so now the penalty for that at that time would have been death. Well, this is we go down to verse 25, and we find out how this whole story unfolds. verse 25, as she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. I am pregnant by the man who owns these, she said. And she added, see if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are. And Judah recognized them and said, she is more righteous than I. So this whole thing unfolds before Judah, and all of a sudden he wakes up to what he realizes what had happened. And he also realizes that she really did what she had to do in order to survive. And he comes to this, I guess, attitude of repentance. She is really a much better person than I am when you consider, everything that I put her through. I did promise her, this youngest son. I'm not sure how that would have worked out if it had, he had followed through with it. But the story, this is how that part of the story ends. And then it goes on to say, so what happens with Tamar? Well, she ends up having two sons, twins. And so God is mindful of her predicament, and he blesses her with these two children. Now, we can only speculate as to what this family might have been like. I don't know if she was sort of left alone and ended up having to be like a single mom, or if Judah participated in this family or not. I'm tending to think he did, because he did repent and he realized how he had mistreated her. So now he is single again. His wife had died, so maybe they went on to live as husband and wife, a much older husband and a much younger wife, but that's very possibly, hopefully, the way it worked out. But she is blessed with these two sons. And this is how the story ends. This is where the chapter ends. And what can we conclude from this? First of all, it is interesting to note that Tamar is included in the genealogy of Christ in the book of Matthew. So even though she had this very difficult life, I guess she sort of ended in a good place. She had these two sons. She had no idea, the significance of her part in the line of Christ. But as it turns out, Jesus, later on, it's prophesied that the Messiah would come from the line of Judah. So this is where she finds herself, in the line of Judah. And that's why she gets her name mentioned in Matthew chapter 1 as part of the genealogy of Christ. And I think that says a lot of things about God and his character, his sovereignty. This is a woman who is not even Jewish. She marries into the family. She has these kids by this unorthodox method, and yet God includes her in this lineage of Christ. And I think that tells us something about the patience that God has with us. I mean, look, he was patient with Judah. Look at what he did, and yet he becomes one of the fathers of a tribe of Israel. I think also it makes us mindful of how God is mindful of our needs, and that he knew that Tamar was going through all this stuff. And I think he brought her to this place after a certain amount of time. That's another ongoing theme that we've seen in some of these stories, that Abraham and Sarah had to wait so long for their son to be born, and Isaac and Rebecca, they had to wait so long for their life to be fulfilled, and the same thing sort of happens here with Tamar. I think also there was this little lesson about Judah having left the family behind. He kind of isolated himself from the rest of the family, and as a result, a certain amount of trouble comes into his life. I think also, this guy that he was hanging out with was maybe not the best company and the best example. I think maybe he had something to do with directing Judah, to go off in this direction. And the other really interesting thing is that, Judah is all ready to pronounce judgment on Tamar and to have her killed. until he finds out that he is the husband, that he is the one that was responsible for her pregnancy. This is something that happens later on in the Bible, in the life of David, when he is given this story about how he, the prophet Nathan comes to him and tells him about this story about how somebody had robbed a sheep from this poor woman and, never repaid her. And, he says, what should be done with this man? And David says, oh, he should be killed. And then the prophet Nathan said, but you are that man, because of what you did with Bathsheba, and you had his husband or her husband killed. That's a whole nother story we haven't got to yet, but there's a lot of similarities between what happened with David here and what happens with Judah in this story. So we do learn some lessons, and people are still people. God still uses us, and God gets his plan accomplished in spite of us. I guess maybe that's the big conclusion here. So next time we're going to be getting back to the story of Joseph, and this is really pretty much the storyline for the rest of the book of Genesis, and God does some really amazing things in his life. So I hope you'll be able to join us then next time on Gen Z Bible Class.